Hola, buenas tardes. It's a little bit early, but we can get kind of warming up. We're nice to know your names, where you are connecting from, what motivates you to study Spanish. If you want to write something of that on the chat, that would be lovely. And that shows me as well that you can hear me. Hola, Susan, de Manchester. Alicante, Silvia, ¿sí? Bárbara, Francia, pero vivo en Londres. Kitty, A-Levels, Alicante, vale, Silvia. From Bath, Julia. ¿Eres estudiante, Julia? Julia, Vichy. Ah, from Vichy, Ana Cristina. Epping, Essex, from Cambridge. Gloucester, lovely. Studying in Portsmouth. Good. So what gets you to study Spanish? What motivates you to study Spanish? Good to know. Is it for traveling? Is it mainly you have friends, family? Is because you are thinking about more of a career project where you want to work in Spanish-speaking countries? Travel and study, Kitty. Le gusta el idioma, Bárbara. Yeah, some people it's just simply that, the love for the language. I teach French and I'm learning Spanish because it's good to understand. Like it is like to be a learner. Mountain guide. Where about, Julia? Where are you a mountain guide? In Spain. Hola, Magda. Brushing up my Spanish for traveling. Where do you want to travel, Mahala? You teach online, Spanish online, Emilia? Muy bien. Okay, so I think we are getting close. See more of Spain. Okay. Well, it's lovely to be here. I'm really delighted. I love this topic. I love connecting with students and teachers to discuss strategic ways of learning Spanish or any other foreign language. So my name is Maria Blanco, and yes, this is my favorite topic, and I believe that it can make a big difference. I've seen it. I've worked with this topic for many, many years. And I've seen remarkable changes in students once they apply some of the key strategies and principles that we are going to discuss today. One thing about questions, I'm going to ask you some things to write on the chat, but if you have questions, can you please write them on the Q&A? There is an icon that says Q&A just there, so that at the end, in the last 15 minutes or so, we'll go through questions and answers instead of doing that through the presentation, because that makes the presentation a bit difficult. So questions there, and then I will ask you some things to write on the chat, and then that's it. That's how we get going. So powerful strategies for learning Spanish. I've already asked you to write on the chat your name, your motivation, where you are connecting from. I'd love to hear as well to know what is it that you find challenging when you are learning Spanish, or if you are a teacher of Spanish, what do you find your students are finding more challenging when learning Spanish? So that I can touch on those topics. I'm going to touch on them for sure, but it's good always to have a feeling for what the audience is experiencing. So understanding the spoken word, Jonathan is saying, is easy to read, yeah? So listening harder. understanding native speakers, okay. To speaking tends to be the hardest, yeah. To talk to native speakers, listening to and understanding Spanish, understanding natives, and the subjuntivo, if you're at advanced level, that's yeah, and in the subjunctive mode. Difficulty remembering vocabulary, okay. Remembering the verb conjugations, another classic. Spanish is a bit challenging on the grammar side because the verb endings are many. Remembering genders, okay, all right, vale, gracias. I get an idea now. Conjugations and speaking, yeah. So we are going to deal with that, don't worry. So what the knowledge I'm about to share with all of you is based on these two things. One is informed by current research into applied linguistics, cognitive psychology, and educational neuroscience. It's got a very solid base in terms of research. And then I'm actually teaching Spanish as a foreign language for about 25 years. But in using language learning strategies with my students and coaching and training teachers, and this has been now more than 20 years. I've done it plenty of times. I've seen it working again and again and again. So I have no doubt, zero doubt, that what I'm going to tell you, if you apply it, obviously adapted to your context, it will take you very far. You will be able to learn more in less time. You will be able to develop better speaking skills, listening skills, writing skills, reading skills, and you will be able to enjoy more the process. We are going to look first of all at what I call four powerful principles. We could call them macro strategies. In my book, I'm calling them principles. The first one is related to formal and informal learning activities. So on the left column, you have the classic formal learning activities like fill in the gap, grammar, vocabulary exercises, drills, pronunciation drills, listening and reading comprehension exercises, role plays, infogap exercises, essay writing, creating a notebook, making grammar summaries. It could be also creating mind maps or flashcards with vocabulary or grammar. Now, those are called formal, and they are formal in the sense that they are done with the purpose of studying Spanish. They are usually done in the classroom or is activities that you do for self-study with educational materials, which are designed for students of Spanish. So that's formal learning, which I'm assuming most of you have already experience of that. And perhaps that's your biggest experience is to learn it that way. Then we have the so-called informal learning activities. And there we have the movies, music, reading, using social media in Spanish, playing video games in Spanish, or interacting with natives. So those are the activities that we do with real life environments. In real life environments, we listen to authentic materials. It's music that is not for students of Spanish, it's just music, movies that, normal movies. And in those situations, we are not obsessed about the grammar, selecting the right word. We are just communicating, basically, or we are just reading a book that is interesting to us. And we may be using the dictionary, but we are not responding questions. It's less formal. So the principle number one, which is very, very powerful, is about combining both, because formal learning activities tend to develop a lot of accuracy. So people develop the capacity to be precise and correct when using a certain vocabulary or verb tenses. But they don't develop that much fluency normally. So when in informal activities is when you will learn to develop more your fluency, which is very important for communication. and you learn to deal with real life environments, which eventually most of you probably want that. So a very powerful principle is to combine, make sure that you have your self-study materials, you do the drills, you attend classes. I recommend very much attending courses or having a private tutor or coach. I think professionals can take us in any field very far, much further than usually by ourselves. That on the one side, and then that you find other opportunities for listening to music, watching movies, interacting with natives, and combine both. Because if you do too much of the formal, you are likely to get precise but not fluent. And if you do too much of the informal, you're likely to get some fluency and be able to understand a lot, but perhaps not to be able to communicate with accuracy, which at the end is also important in communication. So this is the first powerful principle, very easy to remember, having the pictures here, people in a classroom writing, but people in a cafe, watching movies in Netflix, listening to music, that's a winner. Now, the second principle, I'm going to ask you a question, it's a bit of a funny question, is if you want to be good at speaking, and I would say 100% of people, 99.9% of people, this seems to be the skill that they are most interested in speaking. If you want to be good at speaking, and let's say writing as well, what two language skills will be essential in order to develop good speaking and good writing? Can you please write it on the chat, whatever comes to mind? Don't worry, it's not a test or... You've done it, Barbara. Reading and listening, two skills, reading and listening. Okay, thank you. Vocabulary, grammar are also important. We'll see that in another moment. But as language skills, reading and listening are essential. And sometimes people get a bit confused because they think, okay, I did the same when I was studying English, because when I came to Britain many years ago, I did not speak in English as well. And I thought what I have to do in order to speak is to speak as much as I can. And it's true, you do need speaking practice, but speaking practice only will not get you there, for sure. We need to receive the language in order to produce. If you think about it, these two skills, speaking and writing, are productive. We are producing language. Before producing language, we need to receive language. Although there are differences between the way we learn languages as children and the way we learn languages as adults, there are differences, but there are also common elements. And one of them is, if you think about it, a child has so much exposure to a language before they start producing. It's also true that their brains are developing still and so on, but it's the same principle for us. We need a lot more input before we are able to produce the output. So powerful principle number 2 is to get reading, lots of reading and listening, but with two conditions. In both cases, it should be comprehensible and as interesting as possible. Now, why interesting? Because if it's interesting, it sticks. The language will stick. And researchers have found out that also, which is something which makes sense, is we tend to learn a lot from any reading or listening that is not too easy, not too difficult. So it's what we call sometimes in research +1. It means is your level +1. And you will experience that probably in any good lesson, you experience that the teacher brings stuff that challenges you, but it's not so challenging that you cannot cope, or it's not so easy that you just can't do it. I'm sorry, that you just do it without thinking. So one of the two. So you need to select, and I know it's a bit of a challenge for lower levels, because once you get to intermediate level and advanced level, you can basically get native speakers materials, and that's it. But for lower levels, it's basically the educational materials where you can get readings and listenings. The other options are the graded readers, which I very much recommend, and I know these days not many people are that aware about them, are those books which are, they are written particularly for students of a foreign language, and so they are lovely stories, like the normal stories, but the language is adapted to the level of beginners or intermediate level. And those books tend to have glossaries and questions and answers, and it helps to get a lot of input. So those getting comprehensible and interesting reading and listening is very important. Remember, first you have to receive a lot of language in order to produce. So principle 2. Now, the principle 3, the powerful principle 3 is connected to 3 key elements. What are the 3 key elements of Spanish or any foreign language? Please write on the chat what comes to your head. Grammar is one of them. Vocab, grand vocab. Yeah, we have one more. Pronunciation, Lily. Thank you. Yeah. So those are the 3. And this is the powerful principle number 3. We need to develop the 3 elements: vocabulary, pronunciation, grammar. And I've written them in this order because this is actually the order if you want to develop particularly good speaking skills, for speaking skills. So first of all, you need a good base of vocabulary, because without vocabulary, we cannot communicate at all. You may do a lot of body language, but we need the words to communicate. Number 2, we need a reasonable level of pronunciation. And the great news is that Spanish is very phonetic. So it means if you are learning Spanish, you already have seen it, that the vowels are pronounced basically identically. There is a bit difference sometimes, but it's minimal. And really, you can read new words without having heard them before, because the language is very phonetic. So the rules of pronunciation are very set. So it's got to be reasonable. You don't need to be perfect. We don't need to be perfect. I'm sure you can recognize that I have a Spanish accent or an accent which is not British, and still I managed to get my communicating across to lots of people in quite complex topics as well, and so on. So my pronunciation could be better indeed, and I'm still working on it. In fact, I still do my pronunciation exercises from time to time, but it's good enough already to get across my message in most contexts. So that's done. And the third element is grammar. Grammar is also very important, because although it was not that popular some years ago, fortunately is coming back, the popularity, because grammar helps us to be accurate and creative. We can create a lot more expression, much more, our expression is much more creative if we have a good command of grammar. So you need to work on the 3 elements of the language when you do self-study. We do that in the classes when we teach. In any good course, you will be going through those 3 things. Depending on your mother tongue, you may have to work more on one or another. Obviously, if you are Italian or speak a language which is very similar to Spanish, you will have to work very little on the pronunciation, but you may have to work more on the grammar. If I'm learning now Chinese, I will have to work on pronunciation a lot, because there are quite a few sounds that are not similar to Spanish sounds. So depends on your mother tongue. But the 3 elements, if you want to communicate well, you've got to be good at the 3. Principle number 4. Now, we've kind of discussed this a little bit, but just a little bit in the principle number 1. So if you want to be good at speaking, what 3 language skills you need to work on? I basically already said it before. So we have speaking, listening, language skills. Listening is a skill. Yeah. Fluency is what you develop. There are 4 language skills. So one is speaking. What are the other 3? Writing, yeah, listening, writing, and we have one missing. Reading, yeah. I know it sounds weird, but reading, listening, writing, the 3 of them, we've already seen, I mean, for speaking, there is a very obvious connection, which is listening, isn't it? In order to produce a sound, we need to hear it in order to imitate it. So listening is obvious, an obvious one. Also, if we want to learn to speak, we need to learn to interact. And in interaction, there is always listening. So it's not just about speaking. It's also that we will have to listen. So listening, the connection between listening and speaking is very obvious. Okay. The connection with reading may not be that obvious and writing, but there is a connection. I'm sure you have experienced at the school that, I mean, in the early years at the school, they give us a lot of reading to do to increase our vocabulary, because it's one way in which it does, it increases. So that's with reading, we get to immerse ourselves in the language, see the language, how it works in sentences, have a lot of repetition. We have time to check the dictionary. We do lots of stuff that leads to retaining vocabulary and grammar structures. So from that perspective, reading helps as well. And finally, writing, which is a very interesting one. When we write, normally we have time to check the dictionary, to think. We tend to be a lot more editing in our head, isn't it? In editing mode, it's like, is this word the right one or not? And then you check. Is this the word order? Do I need is a feminine noun or a masculine noun? Is this the right verb ending? So those questions, we chant those questions, and we usually have time to check, to edit, and so on. In that process, we learn a lot. So if you do writing about, let's say that you want to talk about your free time, this is a classic topic in the lower levels, or politics, it doesn't matter what the topic is. If your teacher or coach, or you do it and somebody gives you feedback on that in writing, guess you get good feedback. If you do a piece of writing before, your speaking is going to be much better. Because in speaking, there is no time, it's got to be done on the spot. So we can only speak what is already in our mind. And in writing, the process of writing helps us to get stuff in our mind and to consolidate good vocabulary and grammatical structures. So principle number 4 is about taking advantage, and this picture, this illustration should give you the more clarity. It's taking advantage of supportive skills, because those 4 skills are interconnected. All of them help each other. I've been teaching now, I told you, for all these many years, and taught definitely more than 1,500 students. And I've done a lot of assessment. I mean, that goes more thousands when it comes to the amount of exams I've marked and conducted. And I have seen big difference in the speaking skills in students when the courses have before a lot of time for reading, listening, and writing, then the students produce better quality speaking. If the usually there is less vocabulary and less quality of the grammar. I'm not saying that you cannot do it. I'm saying that generally speaking, for most people, it works this way. So don't feel that you're wasting your time when you're doing writing. If you are extremely interested in speaking or listening or reading, remember that the 4 skills work together as a very good team. So summary, we have combining formal and informal language learning, because that is going to help you to develop accuracy and fluency, both. Getting as much as possible comprehensible and interesting reading and listening. text and audios. With movies, you can do that as well. You know, you can use the subtitles in English or the subtitles in Spanish until you understand it. There is no point on watching an entire movie if you cannot understand it. So work on the 3 elements: vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. And I tell you about this, a bit the story of a student I had that I mentioned that in the book, because I think it's the story of many students. Sometimes I get people who don't have much confidence with speaking. I didn't have it myself as well with English for a long period of time. And they say, I'm not good at speaking. And usually it's not true. It's just that they are weak in one of those elements, sometimes in 2, sometimes in 3 elements of the language. But it doesn't mean that you are not good at speaking. It means that you need to work on your vocabulary, on your pronunciation, or your grammar. And usually, I mean, in this case, for example, it was a student who came in the exam. At the end of the exam, she told me, oh, no, I'm not good at speaking. And she actually had a pretty good pronunciation, amongst the best in the class, and had quite a good amount of vocabulary, but the grammar was weak. The grammar was weak. She was not 100% sure. So when she came to the verbs, which is in every sentence, she had to slow down and think. So that has an effect of affecting your fluency. And because your fluency are normally very few people can manage to, when you are already a confident learner, then it's possible to say, okay, I'm just learning, so I'm slow and it's fine. But this is what I mean is, if you have, any of you think sometimes I'm not good at speaking, just think about it, which one of these elements is. Because usually if you just make an emphasis, in my case, I feel is grammar most of the time where people need to make the effort. But it may be different for you as well. And then take advantage of 4 supportive skills, because all of them help each other. So now we are going to take another step further. And we are going to see now, I told you that the first most important element is vocabulary. So we are going to look at strategies, powerful strategies for learning vocabulary. And we go through the first point, which is there are 2 ways in which we can learn vocabulary. One is subconscious. And when is subconscious? When we do what I mentioned before about you just get a book and you start reading. You don't think, oh, I have to learn this, I have to learn that. You are just reading, and once you read that book, some vocabulary would have consolidated in your mind, or you would have learned some new vocabulary, or start getting familiar, even words that you may not be able to produce at all, but you start getting familiar with their meaning. So, and with listening, the same thing happens with movies. You get involved in the story, in the storyline. You forget that you are learning a language, but you are actually learning a language. So that's one way. And then there is the other way, which is the conscious way to learn vocabulary. And the conscious way is what we are going to deal with now. So another point is very important to take into consideration. What are the words, because this is what we need to do, what are the words that we remember best? And I've written there, what cognitive psychologists have found, I think is quite common sense, is that we remember best in the long term what we understand. If we don't understand, that's pretty hard. And what we are interested in, we know that, don't we? If it interests me, the chances I will remember. Okay, and I've written there, I've put there the pictures, 2 pictures. One is French fries, patatas fritas, and the other one is meeting with friends, salir con amigos, to go out with friends. Because this is an interesting anecdote with my students. I noticed in the early years when I was teaching, and we were having an oral test at the end of the year, it was fascinating to know that they did remember really well these 2 words, patatas fritas and salir con amigos. And then is when I understood that the words, escuchar música as well, to listen to music. Those words that meant a lot to them, that they liked, is they remember them without any effort. So 2 elements to take into consideration. You need to understand the new vocabulary if you want to retain it, and you need to make it as interesting as possible for you, even if sometimes it's not initially. 3 steps, very important steps to create, to memorize well. You need to create multiple associations that makes the memory really strong in the mind. Then practice spaced revision, and then test yourself. We are going to focus now in the workshop, in the minutes we have left, we will do step 1. So how do we create multiple associations? Using different senses and using the cognitive ability we have. We do it naturally when we translate. So we are associating a new word, Spanish word, for example, mariposa, with butterfly is in English. So you translate it, or you write a sentence containing the word mariposa. Me encanta ver mariposas en el campo. I love seeing butterflies in the countryside. I'm sure you've practiced this. This is what we tend to do when we do foreign languages. But also, is for you to remember that having visual connection, so reading the words, associating the words with pictures, increases exponentially the possibilities of remembering. That's why it's so good in language materials when we have the picture with the text. Using color coding as well. And then sound, listening and repeating the word out loud. And then using the kinesthetic memory by handwriting. It could be typing as well. Handwriting seems to be more powerful for long-term memorization, or associating words with gestures. So basically, the more senses you involve in the process of learning consciously new vocabulary, the higher the chances are to remember it. How can you do this multiple association in terms of more specific techniques? Well, diagrams, mind maps are a wonderful way of economizing really the cognitive load, because otherwise the mind has to make an enormous effort is trying to classify, to organize. If you organize it all in one mind map or diagram, a topic like shopping, and then you have clothes and shoes, or food is a classic one. I mean, at the restaurant, you have food, drinks, that kind of thing helps a lot. Flashcards. And why flashcards? Because they help to chunk language. That helps a lot in the process of memorizing. It helps us to focus. Once we have a chunk, we can focus more. Our attention is limited to when we are trying to memorize information. We need to narrow down the amount. Try to learn a phone number, the whole thing without chunking it is, for most people, is impossible. Some genius is possible, definitely. Organizing material. Flashcards help to organize the material in question, answers, and topics. It helps to practice spaced revision, which is very important for long-term retention and testing yourself. Ideas for flashcards. I've seen miracles when people start using flashcards, particularly at lower levels, up to lower intermediate. You can use dialogues, questions and answers, not just single words, collocations, sentences. If necessary, yeah, translation. If not, not. I very much recommend that you use images or symbols associated. For what I said before, is well researched that we remember better any text that has an association with a picture or with color. That's why color coding as well. You can also use, if you are doing flashcards, for example, with verbs, use different fonts for the endings and the root so that you can differentiate them. And I'm giving you some examples here from my students, from people who did extremely well. And for example, this is the summary of the content for a speaking exam at basic level, where in the cards on the side, one side is the questions, on the other side is the answers. And this is the the version for, in this case, it was Quizlet, the electronic flashcards. I'm sure that many of you are already using some of them. Just a quick, and this is on paper, because some people like still doing paper flashcards. A bit of feedback from students on flashcards. I tell you, I've seen people recovering beautifully from a lot of lack of confidence once they start revising the topics with flashcards and being able to produce better in their speaking, which they do when they do flashcards. Then it just gets better and better and better. And yeah. So can you please type on the chat if you are already using any flashcard like Duolingo, Quizlet, Anki, any of those? Quizlet, Duolingo, Anki, Memrise as well, very good. Quizlet, great. Paper flashcards, yeah. Fabulous. I'm glad, I'm really glad, yeah. Okay, so we are going to end the main presentation so that we go to the questions and answers in the last 15 minutes. So these are my contact details. For Learning Spanish is my website. I've written this book, How to Learn Spanish, which has been published last month on the 21st of October. And it's just the principles that I've been discussing and more strategies in more detail. It's a very easy read. I've written it really as an easy read so that people in less than 100 pages can get the fundamental principles and strategies that can take them very far. There are many case studies of students, obviously changing names and situations, but real case studies of people who in some cases were remarkable, and then I share why they were remarkable, or in some cases they were struggling and how they got over that. And then I give a lot of sequences and steps for you to take. I've started Instagram recently. You have it there at For Learning Spanish. It would be great to connect with many of you. I've just taken it off the ground 2 weeks ago, something like that. And I'd love to create a bit of community there so that it's a source of inspiration where I will share tips. Also, I'm planning to do videos in YouTube with some of the material we've mentioned today and other material as well. And so it would be great to have a forum for interaction with students of Spanish and teachers of Spanish as well. So if you feel like connecting, please do. If you want to send me an email to maria@forlearningspanish.com. And I'm offering a gift as part of this book launch, which is that I offer a full online coaching session on language learning strategies for anybody who will buy the book, thepress.co.uk. You have it there. And the session, I'm not going to sell you. I know some people sell the second session. No, no further sales. I just ask you to buy the book because actually whatever we are going to discuss is going to be connected with the book. And I know you are going to benefit enormously from that. I believe that. And in the session, what we would do is to go through what you are doing now, what strategies are working for you now, because everybody has something that is working, and in some cases, extremely well. And everybody has something that they can improve. And this is what we can look at, is taking into account your goals, what you want to achieve with Spanish, how could you improve it. So I can help you to get some suggestions and get a bit of thinking and a bit of planning for another stage of growth. So that's from me, and you just need to connect with me via email if you want to do that personally. Any questions? In question, you write it on question answers. Say, sorry to ask, but how will you? The presentation will be here. You can access the recording. This is recorded. You get the link, and so you can see the entire presentation there. And then you can read a foreign language book, how long do you remember the new vocab? That's a good question. Well, it really depends. We need to encounter a word about 8 to 10 times before we remember it. Now, that doesn't mean that you can produce it very well. So it really depends on so many things, on how complex the word is, some words can be used in many different ways in different contexts, which makes it a bit more tricky. It depends on how many connections are between those new words and your mother tongue. If it's very similar, you will remember it. If there are cognates, you will remember. If it's very different, you will need more drills. So it's not a straightforward answer, but definitely more than once. Yeah. Are there any comprehensible and interesting reading and listening techniques that you recommend for students? Well, there are no further techniques. What you need is to find the material and then make it comprehensible. And that is why I recommend the graded readers for reading, because then if you're a beginner, you get a graded reader, and these days you can look at a sample of the book. If you get it from Amazon, you can get at a sample inside what is inside the book. And then you see, okay, I can cope with this. This is stretching. You need to be able to feel that the reading is stretching you, but it's not overwhelming. And with listening, it's about watching a movie and having subtitles. If it's very, very hard, subtitles in English or in your mother tongue. If it's a bit easier, then just try with the subtitles in Spanish. And then at the end, you do it without subtitles. So that's the other questions. So resources, that's what I mean, Isabel. Yeah. What else in the chat? Okay, let me see. It's going to be a bit tricky to go back, but let's see. I've used Flashcards. Let's see where the questions start. It says, I love the app Hello Talk to communicate with natives. Okay, good. Thanks, really good tips. Great, I'm glad. Lots of insights, I'm really glad. Muchísimas gracias. I've got a graded reader book, but it's so dull. That's what happens sometimes. Yes, that's the point. You need to find the interesting thing. Possible to get Spanish versions of English novels instead. Why don't you get in touch with me, Priscilla, and I'll try to help you with the level you are in. For lower levels, it's always tricky. Once you get to an intermediate level, it's easy. I recommend always Isabel Allende, very much. I'll write it on the chat, Isabel Allende. Allende, if you have intermediate or advanced level, lovely. If you like Latin American, Spanish, Latin American style of novels with the magic realism is beautiful stuff, and tends to be not too complicated at the level of vocabulary and grammar. Learning the driving license in Spanish has been an interesting exercise too. That sounds really interesting, Patricia. Yes, it's very specific vocabulary, and this is the other challenge, that it comes a point, like recently I went to the dentist and I realized there are so many words that I still don't know in English when it comes to talking about specialist terms for oral treatments. So for driving, the same thing. It says, I'm learning Spanish as a third language while helping my daughter who ha dado a luz. I'll buy the book, get started. Great, great. Ha dado a luz. You mean she's giving birth, Patricia? Here, I'm learning Spanish as a third language. So are you in Spain? Yeah? Yeah. Get your favorite book in Spanish. Well, Lily, yes, straight. She gave birth in Spain. Okay. Okay, great. Well, if you have that context, this is the ideal scenario, is the formal and informal. You do some study, ideally, for me, a course or a teacher or a coach, that takes you very far. And then you have relatives or friends with whom you can, if you can travel to Spanish-speaking countries, chat with them, interact with them in social media, then you mix the formal and informal. It just makes a completely different experience, really. It's so much more enjoyable and much more productive, indeed. Any more questions? We still have 5 minutes more. I can tell you definitely if there a new message. My issue, Irina say, my issue with learning new vocabulary is that I try to learn too many words at once when it comes to speaking. I don't understand. Yeah. Okay, Irina, this is precisely what I was saying about the flashcards, is that flashcards help you to narrow down the amount. And then you have to get a bit realistic here, is that what I was telling you about the input, reading and listening, you need to do a lot of reading and listening, then drills of grammar and vocabulary, and have patience about production, because production is less than our ability to understand. Think that we can read the literary works of Nobel Prizes and we can understand them, but we cannot write the same stuff they do, because production takes a lot longer. So be patient with that. Any tips for pronunciation with the r sound? Some videos in YouTube are lovely. If you send me an email, I'll find the one I use with my students. It's just watching the video and having fun with it. The more you relax, the better. Yeah. And don't get too obsessed, because you can be understood without the r sound in most cases, but it's good to practice it. Any more news in slow is good? What are they, Elizabeth? News kids today like rap and can memorize hundreds of songs. Good to use in learning Spanish. Any that you know of? Yes, music. I recommend always to my students to have a good playlist. Everybody these days, I mean, everybody has access to YouTube freely, and so many of you will have Spotify or Amazon Prime or with songs. Have your Spanish songs playlist and have a lot of fun with it. You can get the lyrics from internet. I mean, this is the absolute ideal time to learn a foreign language compared to the times before, when some of you may have been in maybe my age, and in a previous generation, we didn't have access to internet and things like that. It was so much harder. For music, the app Lyrica is my favorite. Great. I used it some time back and I forgot about it, but good. Thank you for sharing that. Sting. What is a Sting? What do you mean Sting? News in slow. Spanish is an app website. You have to pay, but it has material at all levels. Okay, great. Any more? Otherwise, we have 2 minutes. I hope you connect. Those of you who use Instagram, it would be lovely to start creating. I will post some questions for people to answer about motivation, about challenges, about tips, and look forward to connecting with you. And wish you the very best. I tell you, the sky is the limit. You work at it, you have a good motivation, you use the right strategies, attend lessons, do your informal learning as well. And by the time you realize in very few years, you'll get to a very, very, very good level. Or before already you get to the get by level, which is what some people want, and it's absolutely perfect to get there too. Muchas gracias y hasta pronto. Bye for now. Poco a poco, sí. Adiós.